John Hoogenakker. As pharmaceutical rep Billy Cutler, Mr. Will Poulter. Assistant U.S. Attorney Rick Mountcastle, Mr. Peter Sarsgaard. As Dr. Samuel Phoenix, Mr. Michael Keaton. And once again, the man behind the series, Mr. Danny Strong. Stacey Wilson Hunt has spent the last decade covering Hollywood for Fortune, New York Magazine, and The Hollywood Reporter. And earlier this year, she was the host of Hulu's official after show for The Handmaid's Tale, One Burning Question. She is one of the most thoughtful moderators I know, and I'm so happy she's here with us tonight. Please welcome Stacey Wilson Hunt.
Thank you, that's so nice. I have to say, how gentlemanly that all these men stood in their chairs before everyone came to the stage. That's so old-fashioned and sweet. So thank you for setting the stage. It was very nice. And thank you all for being here, and mostly to everyone on stage, thank you for telling this story. It's a very difficult story, it's a tragedy, and I think it takes a lot of courage to tell it, to fund it, to make it during COVID, all the stuff. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
By the way, huge thank you to Hulu for making this show.
Thank you,
Hulu.
Hulu.
No one else wanted to make this show. And if they did, it's pretty amazing. And then throwing events like this, it's pretty staggering what they've done.
It is very staggering. And I also want to acknowledge some people who aren't here tonight who I think are just so absolutely incredible. Rosario Dawson, so wonderful. Caitlin Bieber, heartbreaking. Ray McKinnon, so wonderful. Mara Winningham, Michael Keaton, and really everyone else who we don't have time to mention, but just an incredible cast. So thank you so much, and great casting, Danny, by the way. So I want to start with Danny, of course, the mastermind behind this whole thing. And you did such a beautiful job directing the finale as well. I'm sure that was quite an effort. So this series you have called, which I think this is very smart, the trial that should have happened for the Sackler family, to hold them responsible for what they've done to this country and so many people. And I like how this series is, in essence, a way that you got facts out to the public that we wouldn't know normally, and we would take, we'd have to do a lot of research on our own to know this. Tell me about how difficult it was from a writing perspective to balance not only the time jumps, which I'm sure was very challenging, but intermingling stories with composite characters and real characters. So from a writing perspective first, walk me through that process, because I'm sure that was quite a feat.
Well, the composite characters with the real life characters, the composite characters really free you up. So it's actually a really helpful tool because you can fictionalize a little bit and create some human drama that you may not be able to do if you are just stuck with the facts of real life people. So that element of it is in fact a useful tool, I think, particularly for 8 episodes. As far as the overall kind of structure of the piece, it very much was structured around produced crimes. I originally was approached to write and direct it as a movie, and as I was researching it, you fall down this Purdue Pharma rabbit hole where you can't believe what they did. And the more I was researching it, I thought, well, I can't do this in 2 hours. They've committed too many crimes. Like there are too many crimes here. So then I thought, oh, okay, well, what if I did a limited series and then each episode was then structured around the crime and the investigation, and then from there you could splinter off into these different stories with the victims, the criminals actually coming up with the crimes, the investigators following them, and unfortunately for me, those didn't all take place in the same year. They took place in different years, right? So what do I do? Well, if I was linear, then Peter and John would have showed up in episode 7. But I wanted to tell the story of the crime. So that's when it was like, okay, well, I'll just go in and out of time. And I felt like that could end up being a puzzle in its own way and create its own dramatic tension.
And tell me about, did you have a bunch of note cards on the wall? How were you keeping track? I'm so fascinated how, as a writer, just simply you're keeping track of events and dates and all this incredible research. And again, we have to credit Beth Macy, whose book, Dopesick, incredible book. She's a journalist and had chronicled the ills and tribulations of this terrible tragedy in Virginia, correct? And she's from the community too. So obviously her book was a huge aid, but tell me about keeping track of all of this salient information.
Yeah, I'm Beth Macy's biggest fan. I love Beth Macy. She was in the writer's room, so she was one of the writers in the show. She was part of the team. So I wish we could have done note cards. However, a little thing happened called a worldwide pandemic, and it shut
Heard
down.
of this.
Yeah, who knew that would happen? So it shut down our writer's room, so we did the writer's room virtually, and the note cards didn't work virtually. So we tried that. We tried to do it on our computers, and it didn't work. So it was sort of one more, arm behind your back type situation. So I actually started getting frustrated with the virtual process and not being able to do note cards. So I just started taking the notes. And our writer's assistant, she took notes too, and she did a great job, but I couldn't keep it all in my head without note-taking myself. So I was show running and being a writer's assistant at the same time, and I actually quite liked it. It just kind of helped, to be honest with you, to try and keep everything on track.
That's an incredible feat, so well done. Again, anyone who was able to accomplish something like this during COVID, it is truly a miracle, so thank you so much. And Michael, your work is amazing as usual. Thank you so much for this performance. I wish we all had a doctor like Dr. Phoenix in our lives. I just found myself pining for someone who was so kind and cared about me so much, because here in LA, it's kind of hard to find that kind of care. My doctor gives me like 5 minutes when I go in. So I know you have spoken previously about a personal connection to this issue and loss and addiction, and I know you lost a family member to this. I'm so sorry to hear about that. And I wanted to know who or what was most helpful for you in preparing for this role. Did you have specific articles you were reading? Was Danny feeding you information that he had learned? How did you create this very believable person from probably a lot of different stories?
Yeah, that's what it is. It's from a lot of different stories. And it's probably from, living on the planet for X amount of years, But honestly, this is, I'm starting to make myself sick, but a lot of it came from Danny. There was a little bit of time crunch, and I kind of had to figure this out kind of quickly because of boring schedule stories and stuff. And there was a little talking with a doctor, but not really much. When I'd done a movie called Clean and Sober, so I'd learned a lot about addiction, and that I kind of did have to do a fair amount of research and just, really just talking to people and asking a lot of questions and annoying people, I'm sure. And so that was invaluable, and
And what did you learn? It's so funny, that movie is absolutely incredible. 1988, I think?
I think so, something like that.
One of your best performances.
Thanks.
So
Thanks.
incredible.
Yeah, thanks.
And what did you learn? Obviously, the struggle of addiction hasn't changed or gotten easier since that time, but what did you learn then that you applied now to this problem?
Just about everything, with the basics, because I hope this isn't offensive. I don't think it is, but at some point, addiction is addiction, and one thing that I used was, and it's interesting, it hit me early on when I started working on that. I thought, well, almost everyone has some version of some type of an addiction somehow, somewhere, some sort of obsession or something. So I started with that, and you work on that, and you just use that. And but there are certain, I'm generalizing now, but there are certain things that are part of the common denominator people who, one of them was to me how consistently charming and kind of great personalities many people who become addicted have. You know, it was a kind of a consistent thing. Also a tremendous ability to lie. Just an unbelievable ability to lie. And I witnessed it firsthand with someone in my life. You know, I just stood there and watched this guy.
Well, it's interesting that sort of belies the idea that we have the stereotypes of addicts as being maybe,
yes,
less than intellectual or something.
No.
Right.
And so a lot of that stuff logged, you kind of log it back here. So it kind of made the job easier. And to get back to Danny really saying, hey, help me out here. What do you think? And, you usually do a backstory, and he helped me a lot with that. And then just, hanging around the planet for a while and paying attention, really. That's kind of it.
We're so glad you've been hanging around the planet, by the way. Really just a beautiful, humanizing experience to watch this person who we greatly admire suffer and then root for him. It's very, very productive thing to watch because we know it could happen to any of us, and I think that's what's so powerful. And Peter, we actually spoke a few nights ago about this. You told me you had an early sort of exposure to this story working on a documentary with Norman Lear, and I'd love to talk a little bit about that and how that helped feed your interest. Yes? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I also had a personal connection to this story. I had a relative who, continues to deal with it. So Norman Lear was doing this thing called America Divided. And it was in the lead up to the 2016 election. And he gathered together a group of people with a couple of ideas about issues that maybe we could think about leading up to the election that were not partisan, which seems
hard to imagine.
Yes. Everything's partisan. My shoes are partisan. So I noticed that the opioid crisis was not on the list of things. So because of my personal connection, I said, can I go someplace and just learn all about this? So I went down as kind of like a reporter. It turns out I'm a terrible reporter. I don't like to ask people about anything, I would just say, tell me stuff.
But there is some validity to that approach, the sort of
Sure. I'm
subtle.
very good at being quiet for a long time. Eventually something will happen. But it was invaluable as somebody who was going through this personally to see dealers, users, other families, a jail full of 120 young women aged 19 to 25, to talk to the experts. These two scientists from Princeton that were talking about the drop in mortality, the death rates going down, life expectancy going down in the United States amongst white Americans. And so when I heard about this project and the way that it was being done, I thought maybe for other people going through this, because I imagine in this room, most of you know someone who has gone through this. It's not at all unusual. Maybe this show can provide some of the same relief that I felt doing this documentary.
You did an incredible job, so thank you so much for your work. And Will, we've seen you do so many different things. We've seen you do comedy, drama. This felt like a departure in a really wonderful way to see you throw yourself into what to me feels like a very archetypal American guy part. I knew a lot of guys from college who went to do this work. Some women, but mostly men, very money-oriented, into suits and cars and success, like really quick success out of school. And I was curious, is this something that exists in the UK? Is this something that you have seen friends get into, or does this feel like an American phenomenon? Because I don't have a point of reference outside of sort of that American idea.
It's interesting. I'm not sure I'd necessarily thought about it in those terms before, but it's a really interesting question. I think obviously the opioid crisis is certainly something that is kind of, generally speaking, unique to America. But I think that one of the lessons I learned kind of very quickly, just looking at it from a bird's eye view, is if it can happen in one of the most sort of, one of the richest, the most powerful nations in the world, it can kind of happen anywhere, right? I think the show was really kind of enticing to me as a potential opportunity, because I think it is a story about social injustice, you know, first and foremost. It's a story that seeks to kind of course correct the narrative around addiction and amend how addicts have been, I think, portrayed, not just in relation to this crisis, but just generally. In terms of Billy and you know, whether I think I probably did certainly like rub shoulders with guys like Billy when I was, you know, I went to university, and you know, there are sort of, I think, young, financially motivated, aggressively ambitious people who will kind of part ways with their moral code and do the unethical thing to get ahead, for sure. You know, like Michael said, with Danny, and with Danny being an actor as well, you're afforded this amazing opportunity to kind of, I think, deep dive with your character in ways you might not ordinarily be able to with showrunners and other directors. I say that with one TV series under my belt. So I really know
you're
what
an
I'm
expert at this
I really
point,
know what I'm
sure.
talking about. But you know, Danny afforded me the opportunity to really kind of talk about like characters' backstory and whatnot, and we sort of spoke about this idea that Billy was kind of you know, pretty ordinary and pretty sort of middle of the road, and probably went to school and was sort of overlooked in lots of respects.
This was his time to shine and really make a name for himself.
I think so, reinvent himself, right? And kind of.
You spoke earlier this year and very tenderly to Variety about just how wonderful he was to you during your scenes together. Was there a moment that you think back on, you know, the show is obviously very heavy and it can be very depressing, but you also had some moments that were kind of on the lighter side. And I remember you're eating chicken and you're both like sauce all over your hands. Like, that was actually a really sweet moment. Is there something that sticks out for you as being a favorite
Well,
moment?
if I can say something, I suggested
Please
the
do.
blonde thing. So.
I was gonna ask, it seemed like it could have been.
I
a
do
different
everything
choice.
Michael Keaton tells me to do at this point. I just don't question it. Yeah, look, I don't want to like embarrass Michael when he's here. It's sort of.
Well, it's not fun if he's not here.
Yeah, no, true. You know, just about every moment. I was so lucky to be opposite Michael Keaton in the bulk of my scenes, and you know, this entire cast is phenomenally talented. But for someone like me at the stage of this stage of my career, to work with someone as experienced and talented as Michael is really, you know, such an incredible opportunity. So I was kind of just trying to soak up as much as I possibly could, and you know, Danny gave us these amazing long, you know, really interesting conversational scenes that were often kind of uninterrupted, and it was often just the two of us, you know, opposite a picnic table or a dining table or a desk, a lot of tables actually, a lot of table conversations, often eating as well, which I was a fan of. But you
And
know,
I like those scenes because your character is so much more multi-dimensional than we'd like to think these people are. He's a good kid, even though he lied about his dad having cancer. That wasn't a good move.
right.
But he really seems like he's a good guy trying to do a good thing, and that's what's so great about the way you wrote him, is that he isn't this one-dimensional, monolithic character. He actually is. We see him having dissonance about his job, and that's what I think you brought to it. Is this? He isn't what you expect him to be.
That's kind of, I think, you know, we're fortunate in that Danny created really textured, multi-dimensional characters, and I think whether they were on the right side of the line or the wrong side, he humanized everybody, and that's really necessary so that we can understand kind of how we got here. Because I think when we talk about systemic issues and we talk about the headlines and the statistics, you know, they should be, you know, right at the forefront of the conversation, but they aren't actually the defining features of, you know, crises like this or epidemics like this. Human beings got us to this point. You know, human beings made decisions. People are behind this. So if we're going to talk about accountability, if we're going to talk about change, we need to address the fact that there are people behind this, and it's really necessary that we understand the psychology of those people, and we understand, you know, the things that led them to make the decisions they made. So I'm really grateful that, you know, I got to play a multidimensional character. That's because of Danny. And you know, to your earlier question, you know, getting to do it with actors like this is a dream come true.
Well said. Thank you so much. And John, I was saying backstage how refreshing it was to hear someone with a real Southern accent on television playing a Southerner, so thank you. And no offense to those who attempt that, it's just nice to hear the authenticity. So the exhaustive 4-year investigation by the federal prosecutors is essentially the narrative spine of the show. And it offers this great structure for us to follow. And it's a whodunit, even though we already know who did it. We keep waiting for like a different result, even though we already know how it ends. It's kind of like in Glorious Bastards, where we keep hoping that he kills Hitler at the end, and we know that he does, right? And I'm curious, John, what most shocked you about the systemic obstacles that someone like your character faces and Peter's character faces as they try to do the right thing? Because it seems like with every revelation, there's another roadblock and another obstacle that as a viewer is so inherently frustrating to watch.
I'm blown away that, you know, we think these regulatory bodies that exist to protect us could be hoodwinked by a private corporation. I'm blown away that the Department of Justice, which exists to make sure that these private corporations stay in line, have less resources at their beck.
Not even computers that they need. I mean,
no,
just
scanners
down to that
don't
basic.
have it. Yeah,
right.
have to beg for it. Have to go to various other government entities, off-brand government entities, state-level government entities to get these things. It's absolutely blown me away how upside down the whole thing is. And like Will said, we have to get to a point where we shift the focus in the country away from money. And that was the perfect storm. You talk about getting 5 minutes with your doctor. You talk about being in a country that's so incredibly wealthy. It set up a situation that was ripe for a company like, you know, Purdue to waltz in and basically abuse us.
And that does lead me to my final question, which is a big question, which is, what can we do as consumers and citizens to make sure that something of this gravity and level of sort of tragedy doesn't happen again in America? And for me, as a consumer, as someone who uses healthcare, I'm fortunate enough to not have to take medication. I think we have to ask more questions of our doctors. What is this thing you're telling me to take? What is the research I can do on my own? Can I take more time to figure out if this is the best approach? That feels like an easy thing to start. Danny, what are the bigger issues that as consumers and citizens and voters that we can, you know, it's so easy to feel so powerless after watching this?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. You're actually the first person to ask it.
I am?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Michael, what should they do?
Michael, what's the answer?
No, it is the first time we've heard that. At least
Feels like this big takeaway for me from this.
And I would say, pardon me, he's going to be better at this than I am, much more eloquent, I'm sure. But one of the things that is kind of an obvious thing that we were talking about earlier is ask your doctor. You'd be shocked at what they don't know. And sometimes it's not an evil thing. There's no plan, and they just don't know. They're
very overworked too.
Yeah, so that's a good start. Also, you know, I've come back around and believe and get on the phone, and I've done it. I've actually called senators. I've called people, you know, and it's interesting. They kind of respond. You know, they may not do what you.
Well, it's because Michael Keaton's calling them. They sort of.
That's true. But you know that kind of activism, you know, and you know, for me, this is a bit of a larger thing. There used to be these, you know, when I was active, there was an expression, "Don't trust anybody over 30." I would say maybe you can bump it up to 47 or 48, but fuck everybody else. It's about young people now, man. It's about them having the power, and they have the power, and they should use the power. And you know, these tired old people in DC, they're tired and they're old and they're corrupt and it ain't working. And young people can move the needle way faster than the rest of us, and they should take advantage of it and do it in every respect. That's what I think.
Wise words. And also removing the stigma of addiction and knowing how the frontal lobe is affected, and that the person doesn't have control over how the frontal lobe is affected. And I was staggered to learn that it can take 2 years to recover from this.
Yeah.
And that any person who is in pain could be subject to this. It's the humanizing piece of the story that I think is the most powerful. And
That
Danny,
was one of the biggest goals of the piece.
yeah, absolutely. And Danny, what response have you gotten in the last few weeks or almost a couple months that this has been airing? Have you been hearing feedback from people in leadership positions, people wanting to do more, because it just feels so overwhelming?
Yeah, I mean, I was telling the audience in the intro, just the amount of feedback I'm getting online and from people emailing or forward me emails from people about how they're being understood for the first time, or that they're understanding their relatives, their parents, their family members. And I remember a heartbreaking email of, if I had only known, I could have taken care of my mother differently. And the mother had passed away, had overdosed. But this person's view of their mother was that she was a junkie and she was worthless and he hated her. As opposed to, oh my God, her brain has been hijacked, right? So having a much more empathetic understanding of what people are going through can change the way we treat it, and can change therapies. And one of the biggest goals of this show was to help destigmatize Suboxone and methadone. These are the gold standard of opioid use disorder treatment. And I think only 15% of people in this country get those medications that need it.
Is that because their doctors don't have access to them, or what's the problem?
There's a whole series of reasons, and none of them are good. Some of them are highly stigmatized. Doctors are only allowed to prescribe it to so many patients. There's a limit on how many patients doctors can prescribe it to. So access is really difficult, and then some people don't want access because they're told, well, you're just using one drug to treat another drug, right? But that statistic I told you, it's like saying only 15% of people that get chemotherapy need it, or that get insulin need it, right? Like it's a staggering number. And it was a huge motivation for Beth Macy writing her beautiful book, and it was just something very important to us. And that's why we have such a strong Suboxone story in the last 2 episodes, and that Dr. Phoenix's journey is taking people to get Suboxone, right? So that's one of the biggest things I think this show could do, is move the needle on treatments that can move the needle, and hopefully make us able to finally turn the corner on the crisis.
Yes. I just want to thank you for all your hard work. I know this was not an easy thing to undertake, especially during the last 1.5 years when we've all been tested in ways we couldn't imagine. So thanks to each of you for being away from your families and loved ones and taking the time to make this very important show. And tell everyone you know to watch this, because it feels like urgent, just must-see viewing for all human beings.
Yeah. I want to throw one other thing out for you all. There was a number of people that applauded when Sister Beth did her monologue. It's one of the big themes of the show that made me so happy, by the way, hearing that applause. And that's a real woman, Sister Beth Davies. And her clinic is on the brink of shutting down. And she reached out to Beth Macy, and she's 88 years old, and what she does in the show, she does 12 hours a day, every day. And she reached out to Beth, and she says, I'm so humiliated, but I think I'm gonna have to shut down. We're out of money. And so Beth and I started a fundraiser for her, and we raised, I think, almost $30,000 or $28,000 in like 4 days from just being harassing Hulu executives. And Warren Littlefield really came through for us on that one.
Thank you, Warren.
Yeah.
So how do we find this?
Yeah.
fundraiser?
So I'm gonna retweet it tonight,
Right.
and go to my Twitter or Beth Macy's Twitter, and you'll see a link to the GoFundMe page. And if you just give Sister Beth $5, $50, $500, whatever you can afford, it'll go to the kind of treatment that Dr. Phoenix got, and exactly what we're talking about as far as turning the corner on the crisis.
That is so wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for coming tonight. So wonderful to be around people again. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And thank you, Stacey, for that beautiful panel.
Thank you.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Due to COVID restrictions, ordinarily we would invite you to come up and greet the actress, but we can't do so tonight. But we would like